It's an Archaeo Death interview with Professor Howard Williams and his guest.
The one and only Twilight Emporium. What we hope to do is I want to grill. No, I don't want to. There's some obvious themes. I'd love to learn more about Twilight's content, and for those who don't know his stuff, and also just to sort of get some background and just sort of kind of an interview, but we'll probably ramble off and just rant. But I've joined various lives of yours, and I think we've just had chats at various points. But I just thought it's really great to have an opportunity to have a proper chin wag, so to speak. And forgive me setting up that ridiculous sort of dramatic sort of "it's happening," because I thought that would just get people's attention. But as usual, no matter how ridiculous I am, someone takes it seriously, and they see someone go, "Oh my God, I didn't realise there was drama."
Yeah, no, you have to get people's attention on this app. Otherwise, they just ignore it or keep on scrolling, I guess.
So I have a question to start off, if I can get the ball rolling. Could you, I've heard you give versions of it before. I got onto this app just under 5 years ago, pandemic, academic pandemic, trying to think of ways to engage my own students, but also I was encouraged by a PhD student at the time at another British institution, but she was American. Well, she is American, but she said, you should try this. This might work for you or something. And I went, okay. And then, just got into it and addicted. But how did you start? What made you do this stuff?
Well, I had moved back to my tiny town here, my tiny hometown from the city. And this was also during the pandemic. And when you already live in a tiny town in the middle of nowhere, there's really not much to do when you don't have a curfew and can go outside. So I was kind of in a similar situation with the pandemic deal. I just didn't have a lot to do. And one of my friends said, "Why don't you go on TikTok and sing?" And I'm like, okay, why not? So the first video I ever did was singing. And I did 2 or 3 of them. Yeah. And it didn't go very well. And then I can't remember why. I think I just started doing random stupid, corny, cheesy dad jokes. And then it grew and somehow got into the paranormal and debunking the paranormal and Viking stuff. And gosh, yeah.
But you're someone who's, if I may say so, and we're going to hopefully break down some of the different things you do cover in your content. But you're not a one man. You don't have a one track repetitive. But then I just accidentally come across some of these dancers who do 50 versions of the same
same thing
audio, and I thought they'd have, if you go viral once with a thing, I didn't realize they just did it again and again and again, and that's their whole content is just one lip sync for 20 seconds or so. But but in honesty, even for someone who has a niche area, you have multiple niches. I was hoping we could go through, sort of talk about Ohio, then Appalachia more broadly, and then global stuff. I don't know, Vikings, cryptids in the mix somewhere there as well, and death as well. But I don't know which order it'll come out. But they're the kind of things that I take away from your content. But do correct me if I've missed key themes. But
no, you're right. And that is a double-edged sword. For people who are interested in your content, I think you can keep their interest better by mixing it up every now and then.
Yeah.
But as far as algorithms go, they really want you to have that niche. Yeah. And it's just hard for me to stick with the niche. You have more of a niche, I think, than I do, but I think you jump around every now and then as well.
Well, it's both boring for us, and also I don't want to be defined as just someone who talks about one thing. Yeah.
And people eventually, I get tired of logging on here and seeing the same people do the same darn thing over and over again, and I would think other people were the same way. But I don't know if this is necessarily the app to build up a dedicated following that will watch you no matter what you do. If you come on here and you talk about Vikings and death and so on, and then the next day you're hula hooping, you know.
No, I've never done that. That's for tomorrow.
There's some people that would gladly watch that, but other people not so much. But yeah, I've tried to stick with the theme, but something always just pops up, and it's like, I'm going to talk about this. I don't care if the algorithm likes it or not. So
Absolutely, and I mean it has to reflect our interests and our moods. And I've always thought that if I over strategized it, it becomes a chore. And because some people are much more think this through as a business model or whatever, academic version or an education engagement model. And my rationale is to do this. And I think if you get almost like takes the joy out of it too much, if you're too much like. I just want to do videos on things that interest me, and
yeah, it turns it into work on top of work. And you and I are both adults that have outside social media jobs,
yeah.
And for me, this is very much, I mean, I do make a little bit of money off of it every now and then, but not that much.
No.
So it's just something to do for fun, and to share things that I'm interested in.
Yeah.
And maybe teach some fools a little bit of something at some point. And I know this is an opportunity for you to educate people,
Yeah.
which I greatly appreciate. And I really wish that more people in academia would jump on board the social media train. In fact, I've brought you up before. There's a gal that lives in my town, and she teaches at Ohio University, about an hour away. And her expertise is also death and dying.
Ooh.
And I said, do you know Professor Howard Williams? So I told her all about your content, and I said, you really need to get on social media, because this is a great opportunity for you to share your expertise and teach people. But she just couldn't, she didn't really, it wasn't her thing.
Well, I think there are so many impediments to people, confidence, the abuse, so many things that do affect people. But I mean, how did you, I mean, you're not in academia at the moment, but you are an academic, like many people. You've got your graduate, you've got your.
I actually don't. I just have a lowly bachelor's degree in religious studies.
You've graduated with a degree is what I meant.
Yeah,
Sorry,
yeah.
Sorry, the terminology in my head probably doesn't match what anyone else thinks. But you have a qualification.
Yeah.
You've put in hard graft and time in your time to study. A subject, and so many of my followers may not be in academia, but they've got skills and knowledge bases that they contribute comments. I value that. I learn so much from the commenters and the stitches and the mutuals, and you have that authority because you kept up with some of those subjects. I mean, the history of religion is key to almost everything you do, isn't it?
It really is. Yeah, and I'm fortunate, blessed and cursed. I actually went back to college at an older age. I was 28 when I went back.
Oh, that's ancient.
And I kind of did it, not just to get a degree, but for pleasure. And I didn't end up getting a graduate degree, but anytime that I could, I would take graduate level courses. So I'm definitely not an expert in anything, but I have a very well-rounded education in religion, folklore, and history. So it's something that I'm very thankful for. I wish that I had finished when I was younger instead of waiting until I'm old. And now it's like I don't really have the time or money to go back and finish a graduate program, but it's definitely helped me a lot, and I love sharing the things that I've learned, not just from college, but just in life in general, because I've come to realize that so many people, especially here, just weren't given that opportunity or didn't take that opportunity for one reason or another.
Well, if it were down to me, you'd get an honorary degree from TikTok University, because seriously, so many people are learning from you, and you don't, what you do, I think, is without being too creepy and sucky is what you do very well, I think, is you don't try to overplay what you know, or you just explain very clearly the evidence base, where this is going, your take on it, so people can take or leave it, or come with various perspectives. And in that same way, I'm talking on subjects I haven't really, some of the things I've done my own academic research and published on, but some of the things I haven't, and I'm reliant on the same books everyone else has got.
Oh yeah.
And it's just about being able to get that information out there in a format, and that people can digest, or at least know it's there. So even if they don't like to hear it, so I think that's really something that I think. So yeah, you'd get your honor when they put me in charge, when I'm president of the universe.
And that's you teach right now at the University of Chester, is that right?
That's correct. Yeah, they're the ones that employ me. Yeah, for my So they that's where I am. In it's just inside England, just on the Welsh border, but
on the Welsh border. Okay.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
1.4 kilometers. My office is from the Welsh border.
Well, I appreciate that, and I strive to not try to come across like I know everything, because I don't. Nobody does, right?
No.
Even experts aren't experts on everything.
No.
One thing that I think is really missing on social media in particular is just someone or anyone presenting whatever it is that they're trying to explain and teach and share, whatever the information is, in a format that allows you to understand that they're not necessarily experts on what they're talking about, but you can gather from what they're telling you the source information that you need to confirm that what they're talking about is correct. And my student advisor in college, Dr. Hugh Urban, was a very big fan of giving presentations. That man loved to have you give presentations. We did it constantly. And I loved it, like these little 5-minute presentations. And that's like the format that I use for my content, is just the presentations that I used to give for my frickin' degree, and present it in such a way as to, like, this is what I found. Here's where you can find it if you want to. Ta-da! And try to make it entertaining. And that's just not something that enough people do. It's always this very matter of fact, opinions, and with no source material, nothing. And you don't know whether it's complete BS or
all the
truth.
Confidence, all the bluster, complete. It's was that what's that line that Gene Hackman says in that cheesy western with Russell Crowe and Leo DiCaprio? He just sort of bag of hot air as he sort of shoots this guy down. Like they're like that. They're just all talk, aren't they? But when they can't draw, whereas we're showing, we can you can actually do that. You can do the same thing. You can do the same. Sometimes we have to go on a bit longer, but you can get stuff out in a couple of minutes and get some key facts across. And I think that's something. So how, your singing didn't perhaps make you viral celebrity, TikToker, but so how did you build a following, or how did it happen? Was it just happenstance, or were there some videos that went big more than others?
Yeah, it was more, honestly, I know it's my voice. Like,
yeah,
I don't think it matters what I talk about. It could be, dirty socks, and someone would probably watch it.
Have you tried that one?
I haven't yet. But in the early days, I used to do a lot of paranormal debunking videos. And mostly related to Appalachian folklore, which people really misrepresent. Indigenous folklore, which people are really bad about misrepresenting. And just other paranormal videos in general. And I think that my voice lends to that kind of content. Even though I was debunking it still, I think they still came across spooky enough to be entertaining. And that, I think, is the key to being successful on TikTok. If you're doing that kind of thing, debunking, or even sharing academic content, you have to make it entertaining. And you definitely do that in your videos from time to time with music and dancing. And unfortunately, people on social media really like clapbacks. They
Yeah, they
like a
do.
little bit
They
of
do.
drama.
I
And
can't. Yeah, yeah.
I freely admit that at times I have used a bit of, I have stirred the pot, as I know you do from time to time, and it gets views. And that is the ladder I climbed up.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I must have. Some of that is familiar. I mean, I do feel uncomfortable with it in myself,
Mm,
and I know I've deliberately contrived it. Like, myself. I've done a few deliberate, agreed arguments with people, and it went wrong. Well, it didn't go wrong. It went very well. It went too well in the sense that, but the level of hate I got was like,
oh
oh,
yeah,
this is not. This isn't. There's no rational. I thought I could manage it, and then you just realise, oh, this is just ugly and horrible, and
yeah,
they haven't even listened to what I said. They've just gone, yeah. So yeah, I mean, but it's part of the game, and I think as long as we sort of there's a sort of a degree of respect and sort of this is where I'm coming from. People usually are okay, but it's when it
yeah.
gets really ugly, and then you
And
go,
it
oh,
backfires from time to time.
mm,
I know that people like my sassy videos, and I've made a few that go out into the algorithm to not my people, but the other person's people.
mm.
And the golly, that just goes
People get
woof.
very defensive, very passionate.
Oh
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
So it's something that I've cut back on a lot. But in the
Yeah.
early days, I used to do a lot of clapbacks and
Mm.
you know debunking of the paranormal community, like the popular folks in the paranormal community, and they have quite a fan base that gets a little ooh little
Yeah.
aggressive at times too. So it hasn't always been pretty, but to sum it up, it's my voice. It's that's the thing,
Well,
unfortunately.
well, may we drill into some of the topics then? Because let's. I mean, I was going to do it the other way round, but I mean, it doesn't really matter. But I mean, it started with Appalachia for you, did it?
Mm,
And the folklore specifically of Appalachia. You've done you've kept with that because I've seen
yeah,
videos quite recently where you've reiterated the problem of the romanticization. But
yeah.
perhaps you could give a. I know you've done it many times, but perhaps for the people here today, you could give a sort of bit of a synopsis of what is the thing about about Appalachia that gets people drawn in, that spooky paranormal. But
Yeah,
why is it? Who cares? Why does it cause any harm? Surely it's just a bit of fun. Because
yeah.
Appalachia doesn't actually exist, does it? It's a fantasy land, like the Walt Disney theme park, isn't it? Surely there's no one actually live there. A joke,
Well,
joke. Yeah,
yeah. I mean, that's how people portray it,
yeah,
really. And unfortunately, it's becoming more and more popular because people are very into it and very. It's a trendy thing. Hashtag Appalachia. You can talk about anything if you put hashtag Appalachia in it. You're going to get views. But I come from not not the heart of Appalachia, but southeast Ohio, which is right on the West Virginia border, the Appalachian portion of Ohio. And I've lived right across the river from Kentucky and right across the river from West Virginia. And I go into West Virginia a lot. And the region of Appalachia has always been a region of economic exploitation and economic hardship,
yeah,
um, particularly from the energy industry, coal, oil, timber, even, etc. And it's really the most economically, well, at least one of the most economically depressed regions of the United States, and it's only getting worse. Um, the opioid crisis hit hard here, horribly, and Appalachia just has a lot of issues
yeah,
economically. And in many parts of Appalachia, including mine, people have been trying to rebuild their economies after coal up and left, right? You have a thriving economy under coal, coal leaves, and then you're just left in the
mm,
cold, so to speak, and your economy crashes and things go to pot. But people have been trying to rebuild that through tourism. Um, and it's really hard to get people to go places where they're terrified that they're either going to be murdered by feral people or dogmen or skinwalkers, which is a whole another ball game. People aren't going to be going to these places for nature and for hiking and for doing the type of tourism that these towns are trying to build if they're scared to death that this, they're going to die. A lot of people argue that there's certain parts of Appalachia that benefit from the paranormal, and that is true. Particular towns that have a particular type of folklore that draws people in, like the Mothman, I'm sure you've heard of.
Yeah.
There's a little town in West Virginia that has the Mothman Museum, the Mothman Festival. They do great during that time period. But when you categorize an entire region as being this paranormal, scary hellscape, without their permission, because Appalachia hasn't exactly said universally, yeah, we're okay with this. You're hurting a place, or potentially hurting a place that is already hurting, and you're doing it for the sole purpose of personal gain. And it's just another form of exploitation, no different, in my opinion, than the coal industry or energy industry. The only difference is you're not leaving behind a horrible environmental impact behind you. It's not as direct, but it still has an impact.
And it, like all these things, it intersects. It's exploitative of intellectual, cultural heritage, but it intersects with, overlaps with many other marginalized identities, economic, regional, ethnic, cult, so there's all those layers, isn't there? I suppose that, yes, are United States wide, but they all have their local, mix, if that's I don't know if that's the right way of saying it.
No, yeah, absolutely. And one of the biggest communities that is really taken advantage of and exploited is the indigenous American community.
Yeah.
Because so much of the spooky stuff that people claim is a misrepresentation of indigenous folklore. This is very true of the skinwalker thing. The Appalachian skinwalker is another very trendy topic that is guaranteed to get you views. And skinwalkers are not even from Appalachian folklore at all. Not even from the indigenous peoples that lived in the region. It's a southwestern.
That's what I was going to say. I mean, I've heard you talk about this before, but I haven't retained it all. But it's completely different region of the US, the modern US. Yeah,
completely different region, completely different people, and those people, the Dene and Hopi and other groups, they don't even like to talk about skinwalkers. Period. So it's something that people have usurped from people who didn't want to share that information and that folklore and that tradition anyway, completely misrepresented it and turned it into something that it's not, to make it scarier for the internet, and then transplanted it into a region it doesn't belong, so that they could combine two very popular hashtags and make money, is what it boils down to. So not only are you exploiting the Appalachian region, you're exploiting the indigenous American community on top of that.
So if we were going to boil down, is there a quick A to Z of Appalachian cryptids and folk history nonsense that you've been combating? Do you have a little whiteboard or a chalkboard where you have Mothman, skinwalkers? I mean, how many are there of these? Do they just never end? Are they just, or is there a sort of 5-6 repeated themes? I don't know.
It's more of a theme, and interestingly enough, Appalachia has enough spooky actual Appalachian folklore of our own. Mothman being probably the king of the Appalachian cryptids. But then you've got probably one of the worst ones is the feral people. And this is based on a theory that there's a massive cave system under the Appalachian Mountains. And a lot of people go missing. You might have heard of the missing 411 at some point. A lot of people go missing and are never found. And many of these missing people cases line up with these cave systems. So there's this notion that in the national parks of Appalachia, there's these feral, incestuous people who are kidnapping folks and taking them into these caves and offing them or eating them or whatever the case may be. And this has a long tradition, even all the way back to England and Scotland with like Sawney Bean. And of course, the Appalachian region was heavily settled by Scots-Irish and Scottish immigrants. And the whole notion of cannibalism and incest and all that jazz.
All the anxieties, yeah.
Yeah, has been a major theme here, again, used to exploit people for centuries. And it's just being carried over onto social media through this whole feral people crap. So feral people are probably one of the ones that I talk about the most because it's one that is really based on centuries of stereotyping, not just the people of Appalachia, but those same people before they came here.
So there are stories, there are deep time folk stories that are mixtures of colonizing from different parts of Britain and Ireland, mixed with indigenous traditions, but then there's sort of modern sort of layers of sensationalizing, and so the underground is obviously a theme that gives people. There's lots of folklore about the underground, but cryptids. What about the? Someone said, "Is the Melungeon a negative term?" In the chat, they asked that. Is that link into that idea of the feral people, or is that more the myths of people that don't have a wide enough pool of potential partners? Is without putting it too? I don't know what the best way to describe it. I mean, how does that link in?
So Melungeon is a little different. Melungeons, and it's not a derogatory term here, although some people might not agree, depending on where you are and who you're talking to. Melungeons are, I would say, an Appalachian ethnic group of mixed race people with, and this is debated too, people with African American ancestry, indigenous American ancestry, European American ancestry, and some people would claim Turkish even amongst others. But originally they were a group of just a few families that kind of stayed in the same community or in a tight-knit community and moved throughout the region. And of course they experienced a great deal of discrimination no matter where they went because of the fact that they were mixed race people. And they've carried folklore with them, a very traditional Appalachian folklore, because of the fact that they have ancestry from all these different groups. African American folklore is a major part of Appalachian folklore, and I think Melungeons can be thanked for spreading that throughout the region. But they're not really connected to the other stuff. They're more of an Appalachian ethnic group, really a mixed racial ethnic group. And you'll find a lot of communities throughout the region where they've stayed together. There's a town here in my county that's a big Melungeon town because it was founded by Quakers. And the Quakers, being abolitionists, brought a lot of mixed race people, Black people, indigenous Americans, and so on here. So we're fortunate enough, even though we're in northern Appalachia, to have a lot of the same folklore here that you find more in southern Appalachia from that community.
Yeah, I forgive me if my wording wasn't. I think I was trying to articulate a couple of confused ideas I had in my head, not about my prejudices, but about what things I've heard about. This idea that Appalachia is almost somewhere where there's too much hybridity for the prejudices of America, that not for mine, but and also this idea that perhaps therefore it is a sort of strange pocket of that's what I don't know. I haven't got the exact language to articulate it, but it seems like there's a lot of anxiety about Appalachia. Like there's something wrong with an area where people would actually intermix, you know,
Yeah.
outside of the structured norms of surrounding territories. I don't know if that
Yeah.
makes sense, you know.
No, it does. And I think a lot of that is related to the fact that Appalachia is very rural, obviously, but
Yeah.
it's also until relatively recently, the 70s and 80s, relatively isolated. Um, so the outside world, outside of Appalachia, had these stereotypes of the region from um, popular fiction, I guess. You may have
Yeah.
heard of the movie Deliverance, for example. That was a bad one. And because they weren't coming in and Appalachian people weren't going out, those stereotypes really just persisted and have persisted for a long time. And now that Appalachia isn't so isolated, um, I don't know that there's a lot of people. Well, there are people working on trying to get rid of those stereotypes about the people and the region in general. But it's hard. It's a stereotype that's been long ingrained, and there is a certain strangeness, I think, that people feel about the region as a whole, because it's very anywhere you go where people aren't feels weird, because you just feel very alone and like anything could happen to you. There's no safety net. And that's really how you feel in a lot of places around here. And the people are different culturally from everybody else because of that isolation in part. Um, and a lot of the folklore and old beliefs that have died out elsewhere in the country still persist here. So it is kind of seen as a strange other place, I suppose.
And it straddles the standard, at least as an outsider, you know, coordinates, cardinal oppositions of the America, the West Coast and Midwest versus East,
Yeah,
North versus South.
yeah,
You know, it does everything, and it's a bit of everything, and it's on one level that you can't pigeonhole as Southern and just another stereotype of Southernness, can you, or Westernness? You know, it
yeah.
kind of it's a bit of everything. Is that fair, or is that miss the point?
Yeah, no, that's fair. And it's true. Appalachian is not Southern. There's a difference between the two. Obviously, there's Northern Appalachian and Southern Appalachian. There's differences between them.
Mm.
Uh, but there's definitely differences between Appalachia and the South as well. Uh, Different groups of people, different immigrant groups, um, you know, and it's just, yeah. And a lot of the people that settled here were people that were, I hate to use the word persecuted, but let's do it anyway. In Europe, you know, a
Mm.
lot of the folks here were the Scots Irish that came from the border region between Scotland and England, not exactly the greatest economic area in the world, right?
Mm-hmm.
Who then um, had to leave Ireland because of religious issues, Catholic versus Protestant, all that jazz. So they were already a rough and tumble kind of folk when they got to the Appalachian region. And then you had the Palatinate Germans that came here as well, who were um, not incredibly highly thought of in their region. So the people who were here already from even other European immigrant groups weren't exactly the the most popular folk in the world anyway. And a lot of that sticks around over time. People don't realize how much of that is ingrained still in modern culture, even though we've forgotten a lot of that here in this country.
So, in terms of the debunking you're doing, I mean, how much is the debunking the result of people just misunderstanding natural calls of animals and noises of the forest and noises of the outdoors, or how much of it is it biased towards particular cryptids that people can easily dress up or create a quick digital, you know, cheap, you know, how much is it, you know, deliberately contrived versus just, you know, people being dumb? I don't know.
The thing about that is, there are a few people who you'll occasionally find someone that posts a video that genuinely doesn't know what they're encountering. They've gone
Yeah,
out
yeah.
in the woods, they've heard some kind of sound that scares the bejesus out of them and they don't know what it is. And then when someone explains it to them, they feel kind of dumb. But there's the majority, I would say, is it's grifters who are playing off of very popular urban legends. I don't know how much you keep up with urban legends here in the U.S., but not a lot. Since the early 2000s, urban legends have really grown in popularity here online with the Reddit, 4chan, and creepy pasta. And you ever heard of Slender Man before?
Yes, right.
Okay.
Yeah, from my son as well, because
Okay.
constantly going on about this for a few years ago, and I just went, oh, yeah, whatever.
Yeah.
But yeah.
So Slender Man became such a thing here that the kids actually committed violence over someone because they said Slender Man told them. I can't remember the exact story. So this stuff really sits with the younger generation as being potentially real. And the younger generation isn't as fortunate as someone my age is, in that we spent our childhood outside. That's what we did. And I grew up in the woods, essentially. So I was hunting at a really young age and was in the woods all the time. So a lot of the things that they get so freaked out about are just perfectly mundane, normal things. And it's like, kiddos, come on now. Like, you got to come back to reality a little bit.
Well, I remember my experience watching I know the Blair Witch Project wasn't really based around Appalachia, was it? I don't know where it was. It's supposed to be in the States, but I remember seeing. I can't remember now.
I think it might have been a Pennsylvania thing, which is northern Appalachia.
But there's a lot of horror films do fixate on this. My problem was I watched it on a ferry going to Ireland, and I couldn't hear all of the whispering and the distant noises they did. I was going, I can't hear anything because it was like so it was a most rubbish film to watch on a ferry because it required that sort of but people there's that pop culture feeding back, X-Files, films that feeds that circle, even though it's that you can justifiably defend the fiction as it's obviously fiction, but it's feeding that urban legend stories.
I believe it is actually based on Appalachian folklore. The Bell Witch, which is a very popular story here. But I can't remember where it was filmed. But yeah, you're very correct. And again, it's only getting much worse. A lot of people are really big fans of a podcast called Old Gods of Appalachia, and it's become very, very popular. And they do a really good job. They do a quality job. But one thing they do that not everybody does is put in a disclosure in their podcast that makes it very clear this is just for entertainment. This isn't real. But you've got so many folks these days that I call it grifting, but they're selling this stuff, urban legends, as if it were real, and using actual folklore, either indigenous folklore or other groups from the region, to give it legitimacy. Because if you can give something legitimacy, you get more views, right?
Yeah.
So that's kind of where I have tried to step in and say, hey, just call it what it is. This is grifting, right? It might be based on genuine folklore, but what they're doing with it is not. It's new. It's something they've made up. It's pucky is what it is.
But I don't know if there's anything we've missed about Appalachia, but I did want to ask you about, because you also do content on a global scale. I was just looking, you did one about oarfish and Antarctica, and you don't stop at your patch, broad as Appalachia is, and vast geography. But it's not just that. You do global debunking and education content. I wonder if you could sort of give the viewers and listeners some sort of sense of the range of things you tackle on that wider scale.
Well, my degree was in religious studies with a focus in Eastern religions. So Asian folklore is something that I'm relatively well versed in. And again, I look at social media and I just see people creating a panic for views and money. Um, and I see so many people using folklore to do that, again, to give things legitimacy. And
Yeah.
I don't necessarily go out of my way to talk about global things, but because of the content that I make, my algorithm tends to shove that type of thing my way. So if it comes up and I see it, and if like this is something that people are, it is genuine folklore, but it's something that people are using to legitimize their fear mongering, I'm going to look into it and I'm going to make a video about it. I have done some stuff on Scottish and Irish folklore, not so much for that reason, just people like that and it's entertaining. But I generally try to talk about stuff that is trending for whatever reason and that I see people using, grifting, just grifting.
Yeah. So it's an extension of what you're already doing, and where you
Yeah,
can apply your expertise. But
yeah, yeah,
also, I mean, you do quite a bit of sort of humour as you go. You know, some of the responses we have to admit. You know, some of them you're going, no, this is wrong in the politest
yeah,
possible way. Here's what we actually know. That's clearly a man in a suit hiding behind a bush. It's not a dog, or it's a bear with an illness. It's not a,
yeah, yeah,
or you know how you do those kind of things. But then you also
yeah,
do your more. I love the sort of more you know, mocking people. I mean, not mocking the creators themselves, but mocking
yeah,
their grifting. It's obvious it's a
yeah,
grift. You know, like
yeah.
yeah, yeah,
I think you have to. Again, this stuff is, it's important to me in the age where just integrity is dying a fast death,
yeah,
unfortunately. Um, it's important to me that folks like you, folks in the academic community, and even the debunking community do what they can to try to try to stop that flood from just overtaking reality.
mm,
Um, and I don't. It's difficult to do in such a way that keeps people engaged.
yeah,
So if you can find a way to educate people to to call out the grifters and make it entertaining, then I think you're accomplishing something. And that's difficult to do. I've watched other people try to do it and
it's.
just fail.
But
But
I think you don't have a single formula. That's the point, isn't it? You've got
yeah,
to have different, just for your own sanity. You can't
yeah,
approach, go, you know, there are people we know and are very good at they've got a formulaic, all right, let's see it response.
yeah,
Dan
yeah,
does great content that way.
yeah,
But even that, he varies the style
yeah,
in which he does that. But I think we all have to, we can't just go, no, that's wrong, next.
yeah,
You
yeah,
know, we've got to be able to sort of take people on a journey in different
yeah,
directions with different styles, I
yeah.
think. And you do
And
that very well.
you have to know there's a time to be serious.
Yeah.
There's a time to call out something that is wrong and
Yeah.
make an impression that, hey, this is wrong and you're doing a bad thing here. And then there's a time to just be. Some people aren't even worth that. There's a time to just be goofy and try to entertain people with what you're doing. And I think if you can figure out, when to do each, because no one likes someone who's just a condescending know-it-all all the
Yeah.
time.
Yeah.
And as much as I'd like to be a
You
condescending
are.
know-it-all
You
all the
are. No, no,
time,
no, no. But you're right. Yeah,
uh,
exactly. It becomes insufferable. You know,
yeah,
if we
yeah,
all just did the same
oh yeah,
style all the time. I mean, yeah,
yeah.
we hear our own voices enough and go, "Oh God, there I am saying that." You know, but do you know what I mean? You know, unless you have absolutely no self-reflection, which I'm perhaps some content creators I can think of are like that. You know, most of us are going, "No, let's do it differently this time. Let's try
Yeah,
something." You know, mix it up a different
yeah.
way. You know,
I've been called the fun police a time or two, and that takes me down a notch because that I don't like to be insulted. I don't come on this app
no,
to, just to make people mad. But when someone calls you the fun police, it's like, dang, maybe I should rethink my strategy here,
No,
because it's not.
I think
not great.
you certainly don't come across that way to me. But I think anyone who says anything that is, you know, challenging the fragile, you know, vacuous world of some of these individuals, both the creators and their acolytes, will come across as, oh, you're ruining the fun. There must
Oh
be
yeah,
evidence of giants or, you know, witches
yeah,
doing
yeah.
this or whatever it may be. And yeah, okay,
Well,
you know, but yeah,
I'm sure you experience this all the time
yeah.
with debunking the very popular romanticized notions about Vikings and the
Well,
Viking era.
Well, that's where I
I've
was going to
seen it
go
in,
next because we
yeah,
both do that. We both
yeah,
that's one of our overlapping interests and areas. Because I mean, obviously, from your religion and you've got. I know you've brought them out. You've got some reproduction items. I know you do.
yeah.
You've got that back. This is an area that's so big, isn't it?
Mm,
It's both spiritual. So there's an overlap with the paranormal a little bit, and it also is historical and all the myths about history, and so it kind of bridges that gap for me. I don't know, it spans that space.
yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah, this is something that actually some of my earlier videos on this app were more about Viking era themed content, and that's largely because I had gotten into historical reenactment right as COVID hit. So I had all this knowledge, and I'd made my own outfits, and I was ready to
wow.
go. And then COVID hits, uh, and I move where there are no people that are into that kind of thing. So I'm like the lone Viking era reenactor in my town. uh, so yeah, I just thought, well, why not make videos kind of debunking this popular notion of what Viking era Scandinavians did and dressed and ate and drank
Yes.
and blah, blah, blah. But I didn't, I kind of got out of it pretty quickly. And I'm sure, as you know, it's because of the fact that people and Norstock, I love you, but by golly, there's a lot of defensive folk on there who do combine history with what is a modern religious practice.
Yeah.
And that's dangerous territory if you want to try to correct people. So I kind of got out of it for a while.
Yeah.
I've been more emboldened lately, but yeah, it was not. It wasn't fun.
I mean, for me, the challenge has been that I don't want to be seen as dumping on another relatively marginal religious group,
Yeah.
when actually a lot of this stuff, for me, my period, most of the myths are to do with ethno-nationalist Christian
Hmm.
origin stories, and,
Yeah.
and and the reason, a lot of the reasons I'm criticizing some of the modern pagan stories is because it's basically repackaged Christian origin myths anyway. So it's not. And I think some people have misunderstood that occasionally and thought I'm just trying to dump on people of particular spirituality. Well, that's not the point.
Yeah.
It's not. It's just that within that space there is a heady mix
Mm.
of Christianity, reactive pagan, and white supremacism and ethno nationalism and various other strands coming in, and then you get sort of various other you know yeah, various other weird things, like I accidentally stumbled on the whole everyone in early medieval Europe was African, literally everyone.
Yeah.
People were sending me books of King Offa was black and everyone was
Yeah. Yeah.
black, and you go, oh, whoa, where, how did we get here? And it's all reacting to each other in
Yeah.
ridiculous extremes, like a sort of a ball bouncing around really fast around from
Yeah.
there's no, and I'm trying to stay in the middle and go no, no, and and
Yeah.
but I'm not, it's not about me being the only expert or arbiter on here. Everyone else has access to most of the materials that I'm discussing. It's just about trying to navigate people, and not be, so yeah, it's about trying to explain some of the problems with the sources
Yeah.
and some of the narratives without trying to, actually, take away people's sense of identity and, be respectful of what
Yeah.
where they are. And it's difficult. It's
It
difficult.
is. It is. And this is actually one reason that I've always really appreciated your content. Um, because I don't think a lot of people, especially in the United States, grasp the historic origins of the modern perception of Viking era Scandinavians,
Yeah.
whether that's just from a historical perspective or a religious perspective. And I don't think a lot of people understand how much of our modern view, as it relates to that subject matter, was inspired by white supremacists and
Yeah.
and folks who were very anti-Semitic, etc. And it's something that I didn't even really know. When I went back to when I was in school, my student advisor was an expert in contemporary religious movements, and this was around the time that the show Vikings was very popular, and a lot of people were really getting into the Norse pagan movement. And I thought it would be an interesting subject to consider for my thesis. So I ran this by him one day, and he says to me, "That would be fine, but you have to talk about the its relationship to white supremacy and the origins of some of these ideas from some white supremacist movements." And I was kind of dumbstruck, like, what do you mean? Because I knew that this was an element in modern racism, particularly, certain tattoos and things like that.
Mm.
But I wasn't aware of the history
No.
of a lot of this stuff. And when I looked into it, it was really eye-opening. And I just don't think a lot of folks understand where a lot of the things they believe now come from.
No,
And
no.
it's not Viking era Scandinavia.
No. It's from it, and for me, the immediate, and I'd like to hear your reaction to this and this characterization, because I may be off. My angle may be very different from yours, and I'd be interested if it is. Is at one level, for most people, it's not that they're not seeing it; that it doesn't matter. It's fun, it's entertaining, and I don't want to sort of, by saying there's white supremacist dimensions to it, is not trying to castigate anyone who loves the
Yeah.
TV show as some kind of Elon Musk saluting lunatic, or
Yeah.
or worse, beige pants wearing tiki torch, whatever, they're not everyone who watches this show is thinking that, right?
Yeah.
Equally, though, people have to remember it's not that people go, "Oh, you're reaching, bro. You reach." No, literally, I've been at conferences in my lifetime with people who were academics under that regime in Germany. It's and that's in archaeology, but the same would apply to history conferences or communities of scholars. We are a few generations. I'm not that old, but my point is, my supervisor was supervised by someone who, in his day, was a card carrying.
Yeah.
Because my supervisor was a German academic. So we are literally not biologically ancestors, but in intellectual ancestors, where everyone who, literally another of my contact, had people who ended up in a death camp. Their family literally aren't. So we have Jewish academics, we have German academics, Jewish German academics. Austrian, global academia in medieval studies of archaeology, history. We're only one or two steps away from the literal of ideologies of that time. So when people say, "Oh, it's so long ago, it doesn't affect us," oh yeah. So at one level, I sort of try to understand that most people are not getting this and seeing it. And then on the flip side, I'm trying to remind people that I've literally been in conferences where people who are old enough to have been working on field work, excavations, museums during and after that regime, some of whom were card carrying, others were definitely not, and all were actually dissidents and sort of escaped to the States and elsewhere. So, I'm just trying to, I don't know how you feel about that, but that's where I feel it's very immediate and yet somehow distant, and I'm trying to navigate that territory for people who may not get it.
No, I agree 100%. Actually, a really good book that I always recommend to people, I think it's Stephanie von Sterbine.
That's right, yeah.
Yeah. The Norse Revival. And she talks about that in that book where she sat at, with groups of Norse pagan groups where they were very obviously living that fantasy, the 1930s, 40s German, fantasy without shame. So it is absolutely not that far connected, and it's something that continues today. And I think that's, I again don't want to be the fun police, but I do think it's important for people to keep that in the back of their mind always so that they can be sure to avoid going down that slippery slope into thinking that there's something better about them, their ancestors, et cetera, et cetera. And it's very easy for people to go down that very slippery slope. And I see it all the time with people.
I mean, I have, as you may be aware, there are certain people in my medieval communities who see anyone who potentially shows any interest in any faith as a white supremacist by definition. So this ridiculous brushing, and half of my, and I'm seen as a wishy-washy or even problematic myself for actually trying to be in spaces where there are some members of any of these communities, be they Christian or pagan, because they're all seen as tainted, right? They're all obsessed by Crusades and Vikings, and that is such a for me, that is an utterly ridiculous and almost like ivory tower. They pretend they're not, but they are in an ivory tower bubble where everyone is a liberal, everyone is or a particular left, leaning, perspective, intellectual perspective, where the real world isn't like that, folks. I'm sorry. But then on the other hand, you have people who are going, well, there's nothing to see here, guys. It's just fun. It's just my ancestors. It's been descended. I've got my DNA shows. It's in
4% Norwegian.
Yeah, and that's where it's really hard. When you have that. So in my time, I get accused in the academic community of being way radical in a dodgy way that I don't feel is at all fair to where I am, because I'm even in these spaces, and so it's a difficult balance to play.
It is, and on my end with the religious aspect, I've always struggled a bit as someone who tends to look at religion from an academic perspective when communicating with people that actually practice that religion, because discussing and having a conversation with those folks as an academic, like an outsider who is judging them, it doesn't always go very well. But there's definitely things that really bother me a lot about a lot of folks on this app in the Norse pagan community that I don't have a problem with calling out. And one of those things is this notion that they're victims of something. And I think I've seen you make videos on this as well, that you are not a victim of something that happened to, something that your ancestors really did to themselves 1,000 and some odd years ago. And you absolutely should not be comparing yourself to indigenous groups who you are not only usurping their culture with chin lines and face paint and whatever else, but you have the audacity to somehow compare yourselves to them and their experience, which is still very much being lived today. And that is something that I have no problem calling out anytime I see it, because it's such a ridiculous thing that so many people do, and it bugs the hell out of me.
Well, it's dangerous in a North American context, but there are people who are then recolonizing that colonizer mentality back onto the islands of Britain. So you have Scottish nationalists playing this game, you have Welsh nationalists playing this game, you have English nationalists playing this game, you have Scandinavians going, oh, these Americans with their crazy ideas, we're the natives. And you're going, whoa, what do you mean you're the natives? And it's it's the oppression Olympics, but for white people trying to get a bite of that apple, cherry, whatever metaphor you want. It's about trying to get access to that sense of victimhood so that they can justify whatever baloney whatever ideas they have, and that's firstly, you don't need to do that because
Right.
no one's there's really rich, fun, engaging, spiritual connections you can make without having to do that. That's the thing with the archaeology too, and with the with this. There's so many really cool stories, and you don't need to do that bullshit. There's so many exciting narratives to be told without having to go down that route. And it's the pipeline. It's the same, different versions of pipeline to the same extremist, ethno-nationalist perspective. And that's why I do value in the Nourstop community people who are really fighting the good fight and trying to do that. And the thing is, many academics won't even acknowledge they're there and they're doing it. And so, well, yes, I equally share that frustration, but equally, there's some really great creators who are, well, we all make mistakes, but my point is they're making very clear they're not interested in those militarized, the Crusades slaughtered every pagan, but my family alone survived in some hut in Norway, and we set up a YouTube channel and from in a cave or something, and that's how we survived through the centuries. Honestly. Hi, Marshall. Yeah, so Marshall's one person who's been doing some great videos on this, and there's a number of them, who are doing that good work. But no, I think for me, some of the big myths, not that they're necessarily wrong. Like some of the costume, costume is one thing. How Vikings dress, right? And hair, locked hair, tattoos. It's not as if anyone would claim we know for sure they didn't have tattoos, but it's just like the aesthetic is something that plays into. Is there anything else? Magical runes. I've never actually dared to do videos on magical runes, but you've done quite a few, haven't you? So,
I have, and that kind of ties back into the whole the history of the modern Norse pagan and really neo-pagan movement. It's my way of hoping to help people understand, make people understand that so much of what you believe in this particular faith system has its roots in anti-Semitism and the German occult movement of the Victorian era. And this is not some unbroken lineage of magic, from the Viking era that you believe that it is. And I'm in no way, shape, or form trying to express to people that you shouldn't believe what you believe and you shouldn't enjoy practicing what you're practicing, but just be cognizant of that fact. Every religion, whatever you believe is what you believe. It is what you believe it to be, but just understand the background, understand the history. And I would expect that of any religious practitioner, be they Christian, Muslim, Buddhist, it doesn't matter. Know the history of what you are professing to have faith in and being so passionate about. Because if you don't, it just seems a little performative to me, if that makes sense.
So are there any other Viking issues you'd like to address that we've missed out on? Or I'm just trying to think, because I was going to ask you about death next, but I just didn't want to leave the Vikings behind unless there's, if there was something that we haven't addressed. There's so many angles to it.
There really is. Well, I think you do. You cover this subject in a very entertaining way that I think really you educate people on this app in that subject matter, and I again would reiterate that I think that's something that's very important, and I wish more folks in the academic community would do that. Anything Viking themed is very popular right now. It is. And there's really never been a better time than right now to educate people about actual history, because it's something that's popular and trendy, and it's a great way to get that information out there. Or great time.
That's very kind of you to say so. But I said it in a live yesterday. But I need to reiterate for this in this context that I'm pissing off a lot of my academic colleagues by doing this, because I do specialize in the Viking Age, but I'm not in the club of Viking archaeologists. It's a very weird little club, and so
Yeah.
I'm a critical voice when I'm doing my content. I assure my audiences this is also self-critical, but also a badge of honor that I'm not the expert in a lot of this stuff. I'm very skeptical about some of the ways in which our modern academic scholarship, with the best intentions, is perhaps perpetuating or old myths and creating its own new brand of ones that are not 19th century or early 20th century, but are new levels of nonsense. Oh, I got a hat. Thank you.
Yes, Aiden, I've seen you given roses and gifts, so thank you.
Oh, it's very kind. And I just want to say that so I'm not the authority on this. And if I've had a conversation with Jackson Crawford, and we agree on most things. But he's got specialisms that are very different from mine. I've got more archaeological background. He's never claimed to be an archaeologist. And if there are things where his synopsis of archaeological finds is not satisfactory to my requirements, and I'm sure if my attempts to speak Old Norse are embarrassing to him, embarrassing to everyone probably, because I'm just including me. So my point is, there's no issue. The more of us there are, the less it becomes about what Howard thinks or what Twilight Emporium says, and more about the broader community. But we just need to get more people to do this stuff, I feel. Yeah.
I definitely understand that. And as someone who is not an expert in anything, really, I mean, sort of, but not really.
But you got the voice.
Yeah, I got the voice. It's just a shame to me, and I understand the reasons behind it, that there is so much of a in club, like in the academic community, just so much of it is not accessible to the average Joe. And I realize that that's how academics make money, by keeping it that way and selling, publishing books that get sold and so on. But I just wish that the knowledge and expertise of the academic community was a bit more easily accessible to folks.
I agree.
And when someone who is an actual academic, whether it's your expertise or not, is willing to help make that knowledge more accessible, it's something that I really appreciate. And you don't have to be, if you are a college educated individual, you know how to research and present material in a way that people should trust, right?
Yeah.
Or at least in a way that they can research themselves and verify. So any academic that is willing to make their knowledge and the knowledge that they have access to and can understand and interpret more accessible to the general public is someone that gets my respect. So I appreciate that from you and all other folks that do that.
Well, I don't want to name names, but I'll give you an example that I do have my ups and downs about how I feel about this. And I am sometimes defensive of academics when these criticisms get leveled. And I say, but you've got to appreciate the precious honors and the time. And then sometimes I'm just like despairing. So let me give you an example that I haven't bitched about anywhere else, but so I'll do it here. Is a couple of months ago, I was invited by an archaeological society, so volunteers, but usually filled with retired or amateur archaeologists, to give a talk. And I went. This was a stay over. It was a night over. I had to go away. I gave up two days. I did other things, but 2 days of my time going away to do an evening talk to an audience, and I chose to talk about this, Vikings in popular culture and how archaeologists can contribute. And I used TikTok, but I also used some of my in-person talks and activities as case studies of how academics can improve and adapt their skills as students, and everyone can do what we're doing, or I think we are doing, and I gave my talk to a room of less people than are in this live, right? In a university lecture theatre at a university where I used to work, and a much bigger department than I work at now, and only one academic from that department turned up to my talk, and the only reason he was there was because he was working out how to do the tech for the society. And there was don't get me wrong, there was one of the former curators of the National Museum of this certain place, where you can probably guess what I'm talking about, was there. There was also an eminent senior retired academic in the audience. there was a few other people. I'm not, and I don't need a big audience, but what I'm trying to say is that you would be shocked how actively disengaged academics are, even in 2025. And it made me angry, not for my own ego of I need a big audience, because I've talked to so many small groups in my time, but I thought this was the one topic where I expected a big turnout at my old university, where people who've got you in that department, some of them have got YouTube channels and are pontificating about how no one listens to them and how and they won't turn up and engage with me in my talk. And I thought this is a broken. I mean, the UK academia is a broken system, in my opinion. The US academic system's a doubly broken system. It's all a mess. But I think if there's one thing we should be at least awake to, is the need to have at least a fraction of our time online, even if it's one tweet a day or one post a week, just saying some reliable information. Here's a link to a publication I did. And so many of my colleagues just won't do it. And I know there's pressures of time, there's pressures of fear of audience and a pushback, but honestly, it does make me. I have down moments where I think, and that was one of the nadirs, because I thought, not individually. Everyone's got commitments in an evening or in the middle of a teaching week at a university. I didn't expect, but I thought at least there'd be a couple of people there, including a couple of maybe heads of departments who should be interested in this stuff, turning up to learn about someone who's got 135k followers on TikTok. But no, and the only question I got from the academics, this is my final point of the wrap, the only question was, oh well, you sure you want to be engaging with all these weirdos online? I thought, well, frankly, I'd rather engage with weirdos online than weirdos in academia, because frankly, there's a lot more normal people online than I've seen in blooming academic conferences, for crying out loud. So I'd pick a TikTok live audience over a bunch of freaking academics any day. But no, that's just my rant. Sorry.
And you have to remember, and this is something that I forget sometimes too, and I have to remind myself, is that for every 5 people who are weirdos and who act a fool, there's thousands, usually, who get something or take something away from what you're saying that is positive. Unfortunately, the folks who take something positive away are not usually the most vocal. But my thoughts on that is, we can all see that we're living in the age of the grifter. Social media has turned this into the age of the grifter. And obviously here in the US, it's becoming a tremendous problem that is carrying up to the highest levels of our government.
The very highest.
And I know that European countries have not been hit quite as hard as we have in that area, but it's coming. I see it all Germany, lots of places are in the very same early stages of what we're experiencing now. And it's just, in my opinion, never been more important for truth sayers and academics and people who can stand up against the lies and the BS and the grifting to make themselves and their expertise known. Whether it's grifting about Vikings, whether it's grifting about Mothman, whatever the case may be, the folks that know the truth and can share the truth need to be vocal, and they're just not. And I don't understand it at all. I truly don't.
And that is almost a wonderful final thought. But actually, I had one area I wanted to address and ask you about before sort of closing this at least formal part of the live. And I'm not saying we have to end it then, but maybe there's some questions I don't know. But the final question I want to do is, you always end with memento mori. You lot of your content, I mean, that's part of the aesthetic of you got your skulls, you got your lighting, but it is a genuine theme, I feel, you do return to, about our relationship with our temporary time on this world and our landscape. And I wondered if you would sort of speak to that, please, and give us your sense of that.
So again, I've always been a very reserved, shy person, and I still certainly am. And I wasted my 20s largely in part of just a lack of confidence and being shy and just not wanting to express my talents and be myself and just live how I want to live. And as I've aged and watched people around me die off, people my age, people younger than me, people older than me, it's become abundantly clear to me that, everyone says when you're young, life is short, but it doesn't sink in until you see it. You know what I mean? So again, in my late 20s is when I went back to college, and I still hold myself back a lot, but I've just decided to remind myself constantly that I am going to die. I'm going to croak. Whether it's 5 minutes from now or tomorrow or 20 years, I'm going to die. So why hold back? Why worry about what other people think? Just be yourself, have fun, try to, take on opportunities that you're given that you wouldn't otherwise take because you're scared or you're shy and whatnot. So I've adopted that memento mori for that reason. Obviously, this is an old Stoic saying, and it's carried on through other groups over time. But just as a reminder to me and everyone else that you're going to die. Have fun, be yourself, be goofy, just enjoy the time that you have. And I like that theme. I know it's a lot of people think it's kind of morbid and dark and spooky, but it's just a constant reminder to me that, hey, you're a middle-aged man now, buddy. Anything could happen. Just enjoy life. So that's what I've stuck with. I appreciate what you do. And again, I wish more folks would do it in the realm of academia, but we'll see.
Well, hopefully they'll be inspired. But I really appreciate what you do, and I just thank you for joining me. And you have a great evening, and followers and viewers and everyone else. It's been great. Thank you for joining. Memento Mori.
Sleep well.
Memento
Mori.
Yeah. Final words to you. Yes, absolutely. Take care, friend. Bye now.
Night.
Follow Archeo Death on YouTube, TikTok, WordPress, and a host of other social media.